many times I've been here, and I never get tired of it. I never get tired of this spot. It's just kind of nothing here, the highway, just a field. But man, what happened here is so magnificent, and there's so many layers, and I could actually preach 9 straight hours on it. But I'm not going to, right? But I want to,
10.
but I'm not going to.
10.
So we'll just do 8 hours. Just bear with me, humor me a little bit, because I get excited like a kid out here, all right? 1 Samuel 17. Listen carefully to the description of the sites, because that's going to help you orient and why we know with 100% certainty that this is a site, okay? So we talk about how if it's not here, it's near. This is not one of those sites. We know this is the spot because of how the Bible describes the geography.
Oh, wow.
Right?
It's amazing.
1 Samuel 17. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Soko in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes-dammim between Soka and Azekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up the battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with the valley between them. It's all very specific for a reason, okay? The names here, if you're the ancient listener, this would have resonated with you because you understand what the narrator is trying to describe. It says that they gathered their forces for war. Now sometimes the Bible will just say, and then there was war again, and David fought the Philistines and smote them from here. They don't give you a location, they just say in general there was war. But right now we have a very specific location. It says the Philistines gather at Soka in Judah, all right? They pitched camp at Ephes-dammim between Soka and Azekah. They marched in on the route that when the bus parked right here, if you keep going down that valley and over this way over here, that's the route they came in from when we were driving earlier. I pointed out Philistine country. They penetrated the hills just like we did and came here. This is the valley of Elah. It turns the corner and goes deep into the central hill country. Jerusalem is up there, Bethlehem is over there. On a very clear day, you can see them at the tops of the mountains over there. Why this valley? Because it's the widest, flattest valley in the region, and there's water running through it. So you can imagine the glittering ranks of Philistine armor and chariots and all of that coming through here, spread out in the valley, trying to get as deep as they possibly can. That's why they choose this invasion route, right? But we get more specific than that. It says that they're assembled at Ephes-dammim between Soka and Azekah, right? That mountain behind you, so the flat part, that's the Tel. That is Tel Azekah. There's a city up there that they've excavated that we know as Tel Azekah, right? That hilltop. Over here on this hilltop is Tel Soka, all right? So we have a very highly specific spot we're looking at that has names on it. It's not just somewhere in the distance in Soka. That word translated means boundary of blood. Boundary of blood. If you're a mother or if you're a wife in the Israelite kingdom and you hear word that the messenger from the king has said that all husbands and sons need to get to the Ephes-dammim, you know you're about to become a widow. That's what you know. Because that is the Alamo. That's the last possible place you can defend the kingdom before you're overrun entirely. So, best case scenario, your son thinks of this battle. This is at the boundary of blood, which means that the commanders would walk and tell their troops, somewhere on that ridge, everyone find the rock your blood is going to cover. There is no surrender or retreat from this spot. You must die where you are. Find the rock your blood's going to cover. Okay? It's good, right? So Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with the valley in between them. Saul mobilizes everybody from that direction. They come down this valley and they spread out along that hillside here and this hillside here, and they gather. Okay? At some point they turn and they keep this hillside as their choke point, right? Because this is the natural bend in the valley where if they're going to be able to hold them, they have to hold them here. The Philistines come down from that side, go beneath Azekah because they want to be near a city, and they would have spread out along that ridge behind you, okay? So you can't see, when I'm done talking, you can kind of peek your head around this tree. But that ridge, all along that side is where the Philistines would have assembled. So you have Israelites, and you have Philistines over there, all right? And where the valley bends, this is where the champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze belts, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. You too, buddy. You too. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Why do we get this much description? Because you see some revisionist people coming in saying, well, was Goliath just this big kind of oaf? Did he just stumble around not knowing what he was doing? Did he just suffer from gigantism and they just wanted to have him there to be scary to look at? We get a list of his armor and his seasoned use of it. The translation is that he's scary and he's nasty and he's awful. And he's what they're worshiping as the god of the field. Okay? It says, Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks. Now listen to the taunt that he gives him. Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come fight me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. Then the Philistine said, this day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight together. On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Let me promise you, you would be too. But here's the thing. Let's give these guys credit where it's due. They showed up that day. We like to knock these guys and say, oh, look how funny it is that they're scared and they're cowards and their knees are knocking. Here's what I know they're facing, okay? They see that coming. And this is like, you know, primitive tribes people versus the modern American military. The Philistines have things called weapons. The Hebrews don't have those, all right? The weapons that they do have are old and bronze. They break and they shatter easily. The Philistines have an army made of iron. Iron chariots, iron armor, iron weaponry. So it is a vastly outmatched army that Saul shows up with. Not only that, in those days you didn't have a quartermaster corps. So if you were going to eat anything, you had to have your family nearby cooking it for you. So the smell of the campfire wafting over that ridge over there is your wife cooking your meal. She's a few hundred yards away from where you have to make your last stand. You think you might fight a little harder knowing that? So these men show up ready to go, and of course they're terrified, because I would be too if I was them. So they're there, and it says he taunts them, but what he's specifically taunting is, give me a man and let us fight together. Now here's the eternal question about this fight. Why don't they just pigpile him, right? I mean, why are the Philistines, they're so obviously overmatching the Hebrews, why don't they just move in and say, forget this Goliath, we're wasting time? Why do they stay for 40 days and wait this out? Because remember what I told you about that wild and crazy God in the hill country? Their priests have warned them, guys, we've got to be very careful here. When we go in there, we have to make sure that it's Dagon who's in charge of that field and not that crazy Hebrew God. Because they have heard stories of Red Seas parting. They have heard stories of plagues smiting the Egyptians. They remember a guy coming down and ripping off the gates of their city. They remember when they tried to take the Ark of the Covenant and they put it in their temple of Dagon, and an earthquake knocked down all the idols of Dagon and they fell in worship before the Ark. Listen, they remember that stuff, okay? They're not stupid. And so that's why when they come into the valley, they understand what we have to avoid at all costs is making that God angry. So they stop here on the boundary of blood. The field. Has it been 36 times I've mentioned that phrase on this trip so far?
Yes.
Whose God is in control of that patch of earth at this time? It shows up again and again and again. They're all showing up to see what happens. It says that Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Verse 12. Now David, I just like that transition. That's the author in me. Everyone's afraid, set the stage. Now David. I'm not going to read the entire thing. Again, we'd be out here for hours and I get sidetracked easily. But the bottom line is that David is nearby. He has to bring food to his brothers. And as he's coming, he crests the hilltop somewhere over here, and he looks down on the armies gathered, okay? And we know about he's taking bread and cheese to his brothers. And as he shows up, it says that early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of the supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance. And David heard it. Ooh, that's good. This time, someone's hearing it that's going to do something about it. Until this point, there's been shouting and shouting and no one's done anything about it. But the narrator tells us, now David heard it. It says, whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. And the Israelites had been saying, do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel. I love about this. David asked the man standing near him, wait, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine? Let these people be human, okay? Let them be human. Don't make them, they don't have British accents, they don't have precious moments poses. This is a human young man, red-blooded, and he's angry seeing this guy taunting the armies of the living God. But then he hears what the reward is. What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, this is what will be done for the man who kills him. No taxes and a woman. Sign me up. That's what he's told. The princess and no taxes. All right? David hears that, loves what he's hearing. That's not why he's there to fight that day. But what I want to point out about that little bit of commentary, okay, there's two things about it. One, my ministry is to troubled men. And when they hear and see a character act like that, they resonate with it, I promise you. Because it makes it real to them. They understand that David was a flesh and blood man like them. They too can aspire to achieve what God has for them in this life because they can follow the same spirit David followed. He is not this lofty pedestal person that they can't possibly emulate. He has real, tangible needs, wants, and observations. That is God's word being real for you, and I love that about him. It says, when David's oldest brother heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, why have you come down here? In that moment, David is shamed and humiliated beyond what we can comprehend in the 21st century. He's the least important son of his family, right? He's not even important enough to be there that day. He's important enough to watch the sheep. I mean, they need him when they need him, right? But the glory and honor is found over here. If someone's going to have glory and honor, it's going to be found while they're here. So David has to show up bringing supplies. And when Eliab mocks him, his oldest brother, why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those 2 sheep in the wilderness? What have I done now, said David. Can't I even speak? And then he turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. And what David said was overheard, and it was reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. Now remember that episode with his brothers, because it'll come and play later here. It says, Saul went to him, or David went to Saul, and David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. Somewhere on this ridge, Saul has a tent, okay? And he's looking down on the battlefield, and David goes to that tent. And they have this little exchange, and there's, again, hours of sermon and the nuances and the cultural actions of what's going on here. Okay, hours of sermon. We're going to do it in like 4 minutes. Saul says, you are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. This is righteous ferocity at its absolute best. He's giving his resume. He's like, there were bears and lions that attacked, and I ripped them to shreds with my bare hand, and God saved me. You see that tension there? He's taking action. He's doing what he's good because I will attack and kill this bear, and God will save me. Jonathan does the same thing. Let's go and attack that fortress of Philistines. Perhaps the Lord will be with us. Oh, that's good stuff. I just want to run around a little bit here. Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. Now, you kind of wonder, why does that turn so quick right there? Saul has just been kind of mocking him and saying, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of going on here. Why doesn't Saul recognize him? It says David of killing bears and lions. And Saul immediately turns. And it's got to be just more than his resume. You know what I think happened is because in the previous chapter, it says when David got anointed, it says the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him from that day forward. The Spirit of the Lord had abandoned Saul. So when David, in the quiet darkness of that tent, is standing in front of his king, and ferocity is coming out of his mouth, and he's saying, I have killed this, and I will go down and I will kill this. Saul, for just the briefest moment, recognizes what he once had. He recognizes the presence of the Lord on that young man. And so that's why it turns so quick. He says, go, and what? May the Lord be with you. Right? He sees the Spirit. It says, then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. Pay attention to that language. I cannot go in these, he said to Saul, because I am not used to them. So he took them off. Now, who grew up hearing, these are too big for me? I did, right? Right? From the way that we try to tame this story down, is that he's saying, oh, it's too big for me. That's not what David says. He says, I have not tested these. I cannot go out in them. Two things are happening. One, when the king gives his armor to someone else, what's the king doing? How many times in David's journey does he have the throne right there to take? I mean, how much more obvious could it be than the king saying, here's my armor? If David walks out of that hillside wearing the king's armor, what is he?
He's the king.
He's the king. In that moment, David very respectfully and quietly and subtly says, I can't do it. I've not tested these. Don't miss that. That's yet again the Spirit of the Lord whispering in his ear, it's not your time yet. Here's the second part of that scene. He says, I've not tested these. Been a while since you fought in these things, King. Been a while since they've seen combat. I'm a combat soldier, and I know what I fight in. I read this scene, and all I can see is the days that I had a rucksack and a rifle, and I pounded dirt all over the world as a soldier. And all I can think about is that I knew my gear. I knew it. I knew how I fought. I knew what was going to save my life. I knew where the medical kit was. I knew what part of what pouch it was going to be in. My buddy knew what part of what pouch that was going to be in. I knew how many rounds of ammunition I had. I knew the bandoliers and the stress load they could carry. I knew my fighting gear. Are you tracking with that? I knew what I fought in. David knows what he fights in. And it's real stripped down and real bare. It says that he leaves from there. As I cannot go in these, he said to Saul, because I am not used to them. And he took them off. In one swift move, he accomplishes two things. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with a sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. Now, one more quick pause. Why 5 smooth stones? I've heard every crazy theory under the sun. Okay? The 5 stones mean charity, chastity. I mean, there's some sort of high meaning to all of them. Okay, sure, maybe. Also could be true is that he's picking up ammunition for a fight. And at some point, he judged that there were 5 targets worthy of his attention on that field that day. Because in the ancient world, if you challenged one person, you challenged his whole family. And so it is written in Scripture that this is a family of giants that lives in this territory. We don't know for sure a lot of this. Some of this is speculation, but we're given a list of 5 stones. He picks them up. This is ammunition for a fight. And so it's very possible when David came to the brook and he knelt down, he was looking up and he went, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And he picks them up to do it. And he's ready to take on whoever is out there. If Goliath has 4 brothers with him, he's ready for them to attack. What else is going on in that valley? Who does David not have with him?
His brothers.
Where are they?
Hiding behind him.
On the hillside, right? On the hillside. So David is kneeling down, knowing he's entirely alone in that fight. So he's picking up 5 rocks to fight however many come at him. And I guarantee you, if 5 wasn't enough, he'd have picked up 5 more. But he's ready to fight on his own because he knows that the only champion he needs is the Lord. That's it. So he's ready to fight them. And that's kind of the end of the story right there. I mean, here we go. But it says, the Philistine with a shield bearer in front of him kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He's handsome, I hate him, right? He said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Cursed David by his what?
Gods.
That comes in later. Come here, he said, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. I picture this like 2 heavyweight fighters at their press conference. Okay? So Goliath says this first thing, I'm going to give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. David one-ups this taunt, and I love it because he doesn't just go, okay, turn the other cheek and be quiet. He doesn't do that here. It's what he does. He righteously taunts him. David said to the Philistine, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty. Okay? The name of the Lord Almighty. The first citation he makes. I come at you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. You see what this fight is really about? Goliath cursing him by his gods and David cursing him by his God? Okay. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down, and I will cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. Oh, I love that, because here's what he does. Goliath says, I'm going to feed your flesh to the birds and the beasts. And David says, oh yeah? I'm going to cut your head off. I'm going to feed the bodies of your entire army to the birds and the beasts, so that all the earth will know whose God rules this ground. So that all the earth will know. Here's what David's doing. One last one-upsmanship that he's doing. He's actually doing the audacious thing of claiming that Yahweh is claiming the entire earth. Not just a patch of ground in the valley of Elah. Are you guys tracking with that?
Yeah.
So that all the earth will know there's a God in Israel. So in this tiny land of Israel, we have a God who is sovereign over all of it. It's more than just this one patch of dirt. The battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle. Don't miss these little nuances. I mean, he was ready. He wanted this fight. Ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag, on the run, taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. Now David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath. And after he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. And when the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran.